Good morning, Jamaica. Good morning. This is Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99, broadcasting from Kingston, but broadcasting through to Jam in New York as well. Today is the last day of October. We have 2 months left of the year. You would never believe it. In 2 months' time, we're starting a brand new year. But welcome to the program. You know, God has been so good to us. There's a tropical storm Linda, that was heading towards us and then slightly veered to the south. So it is now, as I speak, it's now passing south of us. And apart from a little rain that we may get, we won't be affected. But it is heading in the direction of Belize and Guatemala. And by the time it gets there, I think on Wednesday, it will have intensified into a hurricane. So while we give God thanks because He's so good to us, we ask Him to be good to them as well. Because like us, they can hardly afford to cope with a hurricane disaster. But we give thanks. Another day, another program, Jamaica Live, Bridge 99. We talk a lot about the need to achieve higher levels of economic growth, not the 1% and 2% a year, which is what we have been accustomed to, but 4 or 5 or 6% a year. If you're not doing more than 3% a year, you're not for nothing. Why is that growth so important? Because that growth comes from producing more goods and more services. And in producing more goods and more services, we create more jobs, more people find work. And as more people find work, wages go up. Because labor will not be as plentiful as it was before. And the law of supply and demand trips in. Now, where is that growth to come from? Yes, it has to come from producing more goods and services. But who is going to buy those goods and services? Because if you don't have a buyer, it don't make no sense to produce the goods and services. One of the things that determine where our chances of growth are to be found is our size. Countries with huge populations, like China and India, they have over 1 billion people. Countries with that kind of huge population can achieve a large part of their growth by producing goods and services for their own people, for their domestic market. Those people have to eat, they have to wear clothes, they want to have TV sets, they want to drive cars. So that you have to produce a lot of goods and services to satisfy the needs of 1 billion people. Small countries like ours have a problem. We are less than 3 million people. 3 million people can eat only so much food, and wear only so much clothes, and watch only so many TV sets. And that puts a finite cap, a limit, on how much we can produce for our own domestic market. What complicates matters is that modern means of production require large scale in order to be efficient, to be competitive, to be able to produce goods and services that can be afforded by the people who want to buy goods and services. A market of less than 3 million people, a large portion of whom are poor, and can't afford to buy the things that we are capable of producing won't cut it. We need a bigger market. For example, let us say that we have some clever technicians who are able to produce high-class, state-of-the-art watches that cost over $1,000 US. But in order for them to do that efficiently, in order for them to be viable, they have to produce at least 5,000 watches a year. Who's going to buy those 5,000 watches? We don't have enough rich people to be able to buy 5,000, $1,000 US watches a year. So we would have to find buyers in other parts of the world. There's another important aspect to this problem. Much of the goods and services we need here in Jamaica, in our domestic market, are things that we can't produce. Wheat, for example, is important to us. That's what we use to make bread and dumpling. But we can't produce wheat in Jamaica. Wheat doesn't grow in hot climates like ours. The same applies to other grains that we need to make chicken feed and pig feed in order that we can produce chicken meat and pork for ourselves. The same thing applies to the inputs that we need to make fertilizers that our farmers cannot do without. All these things that we can't do without, but we have to import from abroad, are things that we have to find foreign currency to pay for. Where do we get that foreign currency from? It has to come from our exports. We have to sell goods abroad, get foreign exchange for those goods, foreign currency, and use that foreign currency to buy from abroad the things that we can't or we don't produce. The Minister of Industry, Investment and Commerce, Senator Aubin Hill, recently declared that Jamaica must export or it will die. That is something we have heard many times before. But how much are we exporting? Last year, 2021, we exported less than $1.5 billion US of goods. But last year, 2021, we imported almost $6 billion US worth of goods. And we had to pay for that. 4 times what we earned from our exports is what we had to pay for our imports. On top of that, we have a big foreign debt. We have a foreign debt now which is about somewhat over $14 billion US. About $8 billion of that is foreign debt. The other $6 billion is what we owe to one another, local debt. And that foreign debt has to be repaid. And we have to pay interest on that foreign debt. And the repayment and the interest has to be paid for with foreign currency. Last year, we had to spend $1.5 billion to service that debt. That's about what we earn from all our exports before we even import 1 ton of wheat. So, how did we manage to make up the difference? Thank God for tourism. Tourism is called an invisible export. Invisible export. And what that means is that we don't take our products to the market. We bring the market to the product. The millions of tourists who come here every year, despite all the problems we have with crime and violence. We earn about $4 billion US a year from tourism. And that is what enables us to pay for the whole heap of things that we import and to help us service our debt, to make up the shortfall between what we earn from our exports and what we have to spend for our imports. Thank God also for the diaspora, those Jamaicans who live abroad, like those that are hearing me in New York right now. They send money every month, some of them every week, to their families to pay their mortgages here in Jamaica or to build up their savings for when they are ready to come back home. Last year, our Jamaicans, loyal, faithful, committed Jamaicans who live abroad, last year they sent home more than $3.5 billion in remittances. So that's how we close the account. We don't earn enough from our exports to pay for our imports and service our debt. So we make it up with what we get from tourism and what Jamaicans living abroad send home to us every week, every month, every year. But we are leaning too much on tourism and remittances. If we were able to export more goods, more services, to earn more foreign currency, to pay for the things we have to import and to service our debt, we would be able to use more of the foreign currency earnings from tourism and more of the remittances from our Jamaicans who live abroad to develop the country, to improve our infrastructure, to provide better public services, to improve our education and our public health facilities, all of which require foreign inputs that have to be paid for with foreign currency. So how do we go about that? What can we do to penetrate more foreign markets? What are the things, what are the goods and services that we can produce efficiently and competitively to get into those markets? We're not the only kids on the block. Every country is trying to do the same thing. If we are to be successful, we have to be as good as them or better than they are. Are we? And if we are not, how can we become so? There are some things that it doesn't make sense to even bother to try to produce because we can't compete with China or Japan or Indonesia or India or America. But are there things that we can produce? Are there things in the production of which we can be exceptional, can be competitive? All can be lost. Costa Rica has a relatively small population, about twice the size of Jamaica, a little less than twice the size of Jamaica. But even that is still relatively small by world standards. But Costa Rica produces computer microchips, and they earn a good amount of foreign currency from doing so. What are the opportunities that Jamaica needs to seek out and grab hold of? There are certain things that are exquisitely Jamaican, like Blue Mountain coffee and jerk seasoning. But have we been missing the boat? You know, recently, when I say recently, maybe a year ago, I saw a bottle of jerk seasoning in a Miami supermarket. And I was so excited. I wasn't there to buy no jerk seasoning, but I was so excited when I saw Jamaican jerk seasoning on the label. And when I picked up the jar and looked at it, manufactured in Indiana, not Clarendon, Jamaica, not Kingston, not Spurtree, Indiana. That's where jerk seasoning is made, and put on the supermarket shelves. So why we weren't able to put our jerk season up there? Because we produce the real thing, the real macaw. What about services? Because you earn foreign currency not just from exporting hard goods that are packed in a container, but also from providing services to foreign markets, like the BPO, business process outsourcing operation. I saw a media report that last week, a couple of days ago, that we now have 90 companies, BPO companies operating in Jamaica, providing 58,000 jobs and bringing in, for last year, $780 million of foreign currency. Are there more such opportunities that can be exploited? What about the entertainment industry? Jamaican music enjoys international acclaim. Much of our music is showcased in music festivals abroad, such as Rotterdam in Spain, Marmande in France, St. Pölten in Austria, Tabor in Czechoslovakia, Monterey in California. These are big, big music festivals. Many of our reggae artists appear at these festivals, which attract thousands and thousands of patrons. But could we bring those thousands to Jamaica, the home of reggae, where they can get the real deal? Reggae Sumfest does well and brings in a good number of visitors every year and valuable foreign exchange. But it's just a pittance of what we could earn. Could we double that? Could we triple that? Could we quintuplicate that? Can Jamaica stage a half-dozen international music festivals each year that bring in thousands of music fans who will want to spend an extra week to enjoy Jamaica's sun and sand and our food and our culture? The internet has provided a vast new market opportunity, especially for small producers. I saw on eBay some exclusively Jamaican items: bitter wood, cerasee, guinea hen weed, trumpet leaf, rasta tams, on sale on eBay. I don't see many of them, but I've seen a few. Are we taking sufficient advantage of these opportunities, especially our small business producers who can't afford to rent factory space or buy expensive equipment but can produce stuff in their backyards? Increasing our exports is a critical pathway to developing our economy, achieving growth, creating jobs, increasing wages, improving our public services. How can we accomplish that? If we must export or die, how can we avoid dying? That is our argument today when we come back.
Good afternoon, Mr. Golden.
What up, big man? How are you?
I'm here, sir, enjoying this wonderful weather. Unexpected at this time of the year, but it's wonderful.
It's good? That's good. That's good. You ran away from me last week.
Yes, just a little relaxation time. I extended the weekend, something like that.
Follow you. Well, I hope your good weather continues.
I hope so, hopefully.
We have to give thanks to, we had a storm coming our way and it's just passing south of us, so it's not going to affect us.
That's good news.
But it's look like it's headed towards Belize and Guatemala.
Wow.
Funny thing these days, the storms normally come towards us, then they veer north. A couple of them this season coming towards us and then they veer south.
Wow.
But we've really been good. God is good to us because we can't take that right now. We have enough problems coming out of COVID.
We continue to pray for God's mercies.
Yeah. Nice hearing you, though.
You too, sir.
Yeah, okay. We're trying to reconnect with Mr. Falconer, who is the economist with the IMF at the local office here. Mr. Falconer, you back with us?
Yes, I'm back.
Yeah. Why do we find exporting so challenging in Jamaica? What are the constraints?
All right. So I think the single biggest constraint to exports in Jamaica is the cost of energy. I think it makes exporting very uncompetitive relative to the rest of the world. There are other constraints, I think, like, crime and so on, but the single biggest one would have to be energy. And I think the manufacturing community has brought attention to this on so many different occasions. And you have to consider that the profile of Jamaica's exports is largely elastic. So because of that elasticity, the rest of the world is not content to really accept whatever price is being offered for Jamaican products if they can find more competitive offers elsewhere, regardless of whatever the quality might be. In some cases, quality could be bigger as well. So because of that high degree of elasticity where we don't really have much of a say in what persons who are demanding exports from Jamaica are willing to pay for those products, it's really incumbent on us to make our exports more competitive in terms of the increasing the productive capacity. And then you think of other constraints. So apart from energy, apart from crime, you look at things like access to finance for small businesses. You had mentioned earlier that some smaller, SMEs and that entire micro ecosystem of MSMEs and small businesses and so on. You think about their access to capital and what are the options that are available to them. So in my opinion, I think those three are perhaps the greatest constraints, but particularly energy. When you look at the fact that a kilowatt of electricity is maybe, I think, 40 cents per kilowatt, and compared to the rest of the Caribbean, compared to the U.S. and many other developing countries, that's far too high a price to pay to really be sufficiently competitive.
But in addition to those, and we can get back to those issues that you raised, aren't we faced with a problem as well of marketing and particularly branding? Let me give you an example. When I go abroad, for example, and I'm at a function and they're serving rum, the rum of choice is Bacardi. But as far as I'm concerned, and I don't know that I'm necessarily being, sort of liquor ethnocentric, but Bacardi can't compare to Jamaican Appleton rum.
Mm-hmm.
But we can't even walk near Bacardi in the market abroad. Is that marketing, and is that something that we are perhaps not paying sufficient attention to? Is it branding?
I believe so. Marketing and branding is a big part of it, and that also, I guess, comes with the profile of the products that we export. There are some things that are uniquely Jamaican. I think there are other things that are probably for the Intellectual Property Office to consider. How can we actually own some of the brands that we are exporting that make them so easily identifiable? The term slips me at the moment. I think it's GI, geographic indicators. That special term for those things, like, you can associate things like champagne with France and tequila with Mexico and other such brands. So I would definitely be inclined to agree with you there.
What I think one of the concerns that I have when I look at two issues I wanted to raise with you. One is our capacity. Years ago, when I'm talking about years ago, I'm talking about maybe back in the 1970s, when I was in another dispensation, another life. There's somebody I know who was in the business of manufacturing furniture. Did fabulous furniture. I mean, I bought a lot of furniture from him for my own house. And this was a time when foreign exchange was short. And I happened to have been going to a conference abroad at the time. And he said to me, boy, if I could just break into the overseas market, if I should just get even one product in a chain store. And fortuitously, I happened to have met one of the people involved in purchasing at Sears Roebuck. And I spoke to him. He said, send me some samples. Send me some photographs, first of all, of what is being offered. And I sent him the photographs of, I don't know, 5 or 6 different items. He decided on a nest of tables. He said, I need to get some samples of this one, because I believe that we could use it. So I got the man to pack it nicely, shipped it up to him. He liked it, loved it. But then when he started talking about quantities, because, Sears Roebuck, I don't know, have hundreds of stores all over the place. And they can't afford to put anything in one store that is not available in another. So he said, send him up something like 120. And if those go well, then they would want to step up the order. My man couldn't produce that. Mm-hmm. That to him was impossible. His factory just couldn't crank that up. Is size part of our problem? Scale of production?
Yes, I would say so, because you had mentioned some of the smaller, going back to the discussion on the SMEs, and even though we're able to produce some very, very good products, there isn't really much economies of scale. And so the quantities that are required are just not there. So scaling up is definitely a big issue, and trying to find sufficient markets for these products. So when you look at things like Jamaica Blue Mountain coffee, and I think 80% of it goes to Japan, and their products like that are so overly leveraged in 1 or 2 markets, if something happens, then you don't really have anything to fall back on. And I think this probably goes back to certain international agreements with different suppliers and different countries and so on. How can we negotiate, I suppose, from a better position of strength, that we are able to supply certain markets, diversify different markets for different products. But I also find that we are focusing extensively on agricultural commodities and agro-processing. And so agro-processing is one of those areas in Jamaica that we are not focusing extensively on, but we should. So post-harvest, about, I think it's 40%, or a third to 40% is lost simply because of poor farm roads, bad refrigeration and storage, and so on. So by the time they get to markets and so on, it's the quality has declined and diminished so much. And things like that, covered agriculture, storage, things that are not so vulnerable and susceptible to weather events. I think we need to put a lot of energy into focusing more on agro-processing, and I think that would redound to our benefit.
But do we have how much negotiating clout do we have, though? You mentioned Blue Mountain coffee. I'll give you another anecdote. Years ago, I went to Japan. I'm staying at this hotel, and when I look on the menu, they have Blue Mountain coffee on the menu. Naturally, I ordered that, especially at breakfast. And as fast as you finish a cup of coffee, the waiter come ask if you'd like some more coffee. I said yes. So I ended up having, 4 or 5 cups of coffee with breakfast. Because I thought, like, when you go to an American hotel, you could have 150 cups of coffee is the same price you're going to pay, Until I was checking out of the hotel, and when I was looking at my bill, I couldn't understand how my bill climbed up so much. Every cup of coffee I was charged $5 for every cup. But our Blue Mountain farmers here, they're not getting $5 for the amount of coffee that goes into a cup. They're not getting anywhere near that. How is it that even in those areas that we have this advantage, because Blue Mountain coffee is an advantage, is it that we are poor negotiators? Is it that we're giving away our birthright? How is it that, how we're not getting more benefit out of the things that we can do well?
I think at some point when these agreements are being negotiated, some things might be overlooked. As you have mentioned, the farmers in the Blue Mountains are not getting that amount of money for the coffee that is being exported. And I think those are some of the things that need to be addressed, not just for the products that we have an advantage, like Blue Mountain coffee, but other specific commodities, I guess, going forward. So that I can't say whether or not our negotiating power ability is a function of our size, but it also doesn't help in some instances.
Where should our focus be? I mean, I remember I was in cabinet at the time, for example, and we were pushing the 807 program, which employed quite a lot of people. Marketing was not our problem, not our headache. The investors, they had their markets, they came here, they employed local people, they produced the goods and they shipped it to themselves. But the unattached producer who wants to export, he has a problem. I mean, trying to penetrate. Most of the producers in Jamaica, they can't afford to have a whole department that is focused on export promotion. They can't afford to put people, sometimes, for example, when I say, we send trade missions abroad to attend trade shows. And the same person who is jumping on the plane to go to the trade show is the same person who runs the factory. So while he's busy at the trade show, who is running the factory? The question I'm getting to, which I want to put to you, is: ought we to redefine our focus? Should we be looking at these big markets where we have to go compete with the Philippines and the Indonesias of this world? Or should we be looking at those niche markets, particularly where brand Jamaica carries some weight and where we can deal with those quantities, to see if we can find sufficient niche markets to keep a lot of producers in Jamaica busy? Should that be what we're looking at, or is that too unpredictable and unreliable to base some manufacturing effort and endeavor on?
Well, before you mentioned niche markets, after you mentioned the big markets, I was going to say that's where I think we should put the focus on niche markets. And regardless of the unreliability, I don't think that's a permanent condition, because if you gain a certain foothold, right, as opposed to larger markets that they can, I think larger markets are more susceptible or more likely to buy from a wider range of producers. And so Jamaica might get eventually left out. But if we develop sufficient relationships with niche markets and countries of a smaller size than the larger markets, that might be better for us in the long run.
Can I beg you just hold for a minute? I have to take a break. I'm coming right back to you.
All right.
Welcome back. It's Jamaica Library on Bridge 99, and we're wrapping up a discussion with Mr. Keenan Falconer, who is the economist at the local IMF office here in Jamaica. We're talking about Jamaica's export challenges. What can be done to improve our level of exports? Mr. Falconer, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned energy as a big constraint, and then you also made some references to access to capital, and that would affect particularly the smaller producers. But even then, if we're going to export, we're going to have to be damn well competitive, because there are a lot of other countries that are trying to do the same thing, no?
Absolutely.
Now, years ago, I don't know what it's like now, years ago, I found that if you were to go in the average factory in Jamaica and look at the machinery that they have in there and rub off the grease and dirt off the nameplate, you're probably going to see it saying manufactured in Chicago, Illinois in 1984. If we're using outdated equipment, we're not going to cut it. I know of one local producer, one of the best, who does very well, has a big hold on the local market and does well with exports. And that company, I don't think that they have a piece of machinery in their plants that is older than 4 years. When a piece of equipment reaches 4 years, they rip it out and they don't have a problem in selling it because there are always people willing to buy it, but they're putting in state-of-the-art stuff. If we don't do that, and I don't know how many of our manufacturers and wannabe exporters are capable of doing that, because that requires capital. It requires access to capital. But if we're not on the cutting edge of technology in 2022, we're not going to be able to penetrate the export market, are we?
No, we wouldn't. And that goes back as well. Everything, I think, is linked. So as you mentioned, you need capital to upgrade plant, property, and equipment. And, of course, most of that would be imported. So that also goes back to what are the policies governing imports of technology and so on. And I think it might be a separate discussion, but when you look at things like high tariffs and duties and so on, that invariably affects the ability of especially small producers and small exporters to upgrade their plant, property, and equipment. And so you start to ask the question, when you have such high tariffs and high barriers to import, what is the goal of those? Because normally, when you have high tariffs, high duties, and so on, it's supposed to protect some local industries that might dabble in production of technology and so on. But we're not producers of those technology. We are consumers of it, and we have to import it. So those are the things that need to really be addressed overall. But separate from that, it's not only something that affects the agricultural commodities side of exports. Other exports, we haven't spoken so much about Jamaica's largest export, which is, of course, bauxite and alumina. And you look at the fact that I think Alpart has been shut out for a couple of years. It's been mothballed for that same reason, upgrading plant, property, and equipment, and so on. So it's something that affects production.
We're going to have to pick this up. We're going to have to leave it there, but I want to thank you for coming on. Our discussion has probably raised more questions than what answers we have been able to provide. So don't feel no way if I have to call you again, because we're going to have to continue this discussion.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you very much, Mr. Keenan Falconer, economist with the IMF office here in Jamaica. We're going to be joined now by Mrs. Sharon Willis, who is Director of Administration at the Statistical Institute of Jamaica, Director of Administrative Statistics Division, I should say, who can give us some numbers to kind of give us some measurement of the issue that we're trying to discuss. Mrs. Willis, welcome to the program.
Good afternoon, Mr. Golden.
How are you?
I'm fine, thanks.
Tell me, we have a problem, an imbalance between our exports and our imports, no?
Yes.
And that is what we call a trade deficit. What has been happening to that trade deficit over time? Is it getting wider or is it shrinking?
Okay. Well, good afternoon again. Let me just start out by saying that a trade deficit occurs when a country imports more than its exports to other countries. And what we have been seeing, especially in the past 10 years or more, Jamaica has been importing 4 times what we export to other countries. So the figure
is that multiplier growing, or it has remained fairly steady?
Fairly steady.
But it does mean that as we import more and export more, the value of the trade deficit increases.
Yes, it has been increasing.
Yes. The last time I looked at the numbers...
2020, apart from 2020 when it went down, and that would have been impacted by COVID, right? Yeah. It has started to pick up back again.
Yes. But the last time I looked at the numbers, we were importing like $1.5 billion US. Sorry, exporting $1.5 billion, but we were importing like $6 billion.
You're talking about 2021?
I think it would have been 2021, yes.
Okay. So in 2021, imports increased by 25.4% to 4.8 billion roughly. And our exports increased by 15.2 to roughly $1.4 billion, right?
So in 2021, our import figure for 2021,
yes.
How does that compare with pre-COVID import levels?
It was below. It was below, definitely below.
So pre-COVID, it would be like what?
Roughly 5 billion.
5 billion.
Right, even 6 billion.
And our exports pre-COVID would be about what?
About in the same range.
1.4?
About 1.4, 1.5, yes.
So the gap has remained pretty constant.
Yes, it has.
Now, if we didn't have tourism, dog damn us up on. Huh? I mean, that's how we make up the gap, not from tourism and remittances.
And services as well, right.
Services, yeah.
Right.
Well, so tourism is part of the services account. No?
Right. So the services has been doing much better worldwide when you look at it in terms, when you compare services to goods. So goods basically, trading goods has been on the decline, according to the international reports. But for a small developing state like Jamaica, we are highly dependent on imports. Right. So our exports, the major one is actually from the mining and quarrying, but especially for the last 6 months of 2022,
that has been in a slump.
That has been in a slump, right?
Yeah.
And that has been largely impacted by the Jamaica fire.
Yes.
Right. So our domestic exports actually fell by 3.3% due to a 55.2% decline in exports on mining and quarrying industry.
Sometimes, I wonder, for example, take a country like the Bahamas. The Bahamas kind of took up a decision that, look, we can't export goods. We don't have the agricultural land to produce the whole heap of agriculture. We don't have the culture and the tradition and the skills to be a major manufacturer. Right. We are going to focus our attention on what we believe we know best and can do best, and that is tourism. And we are going to make enough money from tourism to be able to pay for the things that we are going to have to import, since we're not into the manufacturing business. Now, that is a model that they have pursued. I happen to know that the new government is seeking to tweak that model a little bit. But in terms of our choices, the minister, for example, said a few days ago that we must export or die. Well, I mean, I've been hearing that for a long time and we haven't died yet. I'm just wondering whether our the late governor of the Bank of Jamaica, J. Arthur Brown, had said it 40 years ago. He said our future lie in services. Is it that we should be putting more emphasis? I mean, look at BPO, for example. I saw in the papers a few days ago where the business process outsourcing. We have 90 companies operating in Jamaica now. I didn't know we had so many.
Yes, the number has risen.
And they employ 58,000 people, the report said, and earned last year $780 million US. Or do our experiences and do the statistics that you have to marshal suggest to us that perhaps we need to shift our focus and look more seriously at services rather than trying to produce goods, given the ferocity of the competition in the international market, because we are trying to compete with China and with Japan and Indonesia and these countries, and they are way ahead of us in terms of efficiency levels.
But based on the data that is coming out from what we have received from Jamaica Customs, our primary provider of trade data, we are seeing, as at June 2022, we are seeing growth in manufacture, especially where you have food, beverages, and tobacco. For that group, manufacture grew by 32.2%. So we are seeing some growth based on, for example, our canned akis, our baked products. Sauces has slipped somewhat, but that is one of the major items. And on the other hand, we have our refined petroleum products, which grew by 60.4%.
Don't get me wrong,
Right.
I'm not suggesting that we abandon anything.
Yes.
But I was just wondering if we are to produce the kind of numbers that will make you excited when you start to crunch them. I'm just wondering whether let those who can export the akis export the akis.
Uh-huh.
But from a strategic point of view, there are many people who believe that given the globalized context in which we operate, we must play to our strengths. And people will argue that our strengths lie in services. I'll give you an anecdote. Years ago, I happened to have been in St. Lucia, and I stayed at the Sandals Hotel there. And I observed something that I didn't observe when I stayed at Sandals in Jamaica. You go for breakfast, the orange juice is finished. You have to call some supervisor's attention to the fact that orange juice not finished, but all the glasses had been used up.
Okay.
You have to call somebody's attention. Hey, bring some fresh glasses. And I mentioned to Boots Stewart when I got back, I say, at your Jamaican hotels, that wouldn't happen, When it get down to 6 glasses left, somebody would be there replenishing the glasses. And he says that's the difference that I find too. Jamaicans just are far better in terms of providing services. We are a service-oriented people. Maybe that is our strength. Maybe that's where we should be looking to expand our exports, because exports are both for goods and services, no?
Yes, yes.
I was hoping you'd give me a thought on that.
Well, the data that is provided by STATIN, we basically provide it to our users.
And
they
have to make
do the
policies.
planning, right? They make policies,
well,
right? So we can only comment on what we have put together.
And you know me already, I'm not going to take you out of your lane. But in terms of agricultural exports,
right?
How have those been doing?
Okay, so for the first 6 months of the year, agriculture, because we classify our domestic exports by industry. So the agricultural industry, there was some hope. It increased by 8.9%, and the major items were yams. So we earned approximately $16.2 million, although there was a 3.9% decline. And on the other hand, coffee was the next important item, and we earned $11.7 million, and that was a 30.7% increase.
What about our processed foods?
The processed foods, now that's where we are seeing the growth. Right, so like I spoke about canned aki, that's one of the processed foods. So where we actually have the value-added items that we are seeing growth. And we have like meat preparations that will be going up. I think I mentioned baked products before. That has been showing a lot of growth, 18.8%. Sauces is one of the top items, but that's slumped slightly. And rum, there was a 14.1% decline, however. But rum is normally one of the major ones. Right. So those are the value-added items. That's where we are seeing the growth for the most part.
Yeah. Well, you provide us with the data. We must use that data intelligently in terms of making the choices that we have to make.
Right, and we are seeing growth in the refined petroleum products because, we would have brought in the crude, processed it, right, and we are exporting.
Yeah.
Right, so those are where the growth figures are.
Mrs. Sharon Willis, Director of Administrative Statistics at the Statistical Institute of Jamaica. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Okay, you're most welcome.
Yeah, we're coming up to the break, but we're going to say goodbye to Bo before we go. Bo, regard.
Yes, Mr. Golden. Yes, sir.
All right, my boy, we part company here, no?
Yes, we do. It's Halloween here in the United States, so it's a scary day.
Tell me something. Why don't you abandon that foolishness? Walk around all the place and spook people. Huh?
Man, it's for the kids, but we'll see what happens. You know, we just hope everybody be safe out there.
Well, don't make no dumpy best with you here, my friend.
I won't.
Yeah. Okay,
also, we're getting ready for elections next week. So
yes, I'm watching that. I don't like what I'm reading and hearing, but anyhow, we're watching it.
We'll talk again, sir.
Yeah, okay. All right, we take a break. Welcome back. It's Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99. We're talking today about Jamaica's export challenges, focusing on our trade deficit, our huge trade deficit, more than, based on the figures we just got from Mrs. Willis, well over $3 billion US. That's the difference between what we earn from our exports and what we pay for imports. And we're talking about goods here. We're not talking about goods and services, because when you talk about services now, that's when you have to bring in tourism. I know that on the services side, we have a trade surplus. We earn more than we, from our services, than we spend for services that we have to import from abroad. Tourism being the major contributor to that favorable position. We're pleased to be joined now by Mr. John Mahfood, who is president of the Jamaica Manufacturers and Exporters Association. Mr. Mahfood, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Mr. Golden.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Tell me, we've been talking about the need to expand exports from, I was a high school student watching and listening to Mr. Bob Lightburn. And that's a long time. In those days, of course, we were dealing with a completely different environment. We weren't talking about the globalized context in which we now operate, where many of the barriers that would protect us so that our local manufacturers could, hone their skills and develop their efficiencies. That is no longer the case. What are the biggest obstacles to our exporters today in terms of penetrating the overseas market?
Bruce, I would like to just go a little bit in history so that it helps us to understand where we are now, and it will help us to understand maybe some of the things that need to be done to move forward export. So if you allow me a couple of minutes. So basically, as you know, historically, before independence, we were only dealing with exports of sugar and banana. And later on, we had the bauxite. Then in the 60s, as you mentioned, Mr. Lightburn and others promoted this situation where companies were invited to set up manufacturing in Jamaica, and they would then discontinue the importation of those items that were manufactured. That was good, and it created a lot of manufacturing operations in Jamaica. But the problem was these companies that set up operations here were only doing so to fill local demand and not to export. So they were not efficient, and there was no interest in them being efficient because, generally speaking, they were monopolies. The economy wasn't big enough to have two tire factories or two condensed milk factories. Everybody was a monopoly who opened up a factory.
And they were protected.
And our government at the time, while they had a great idea in setting it up, they did not create the requirement for these companies to be efficient or to export. And so as time went on, they became expensive operators. They didn't choose to even export to the rest of the CARICOM region. So the big manufacturers like the tires or condensed milk would still be shipping to the rest of Caribbean area from other factories around the world. And the factories that they set up here produced expensive goods and made a lot of money for their owners. So that's one aspect. In the 70s, we started, because of the turbulence, economic, political turbulence, we lost a lot of private sector persons. A lot of factories closed down or were sold. In the 80s, the then government at the end of the 80s opened up the economy to imports. And they did that virtually overnight. So every single foreign-owned manufacturer who was around in the 60s closed down operations between the 80s and the early 2000s. Now, in the 90s, there was a foreign exchange shortages. There were high interest rates. Well, I should say before that, in the 80s as well, there was a foreign exchange shortage. So some local-owned conglomerates started to export in order to obtain foreign exchange. They also were not interested in efficiency. They just needed foreign exchange to run their importation businesses. And again, they weren't efficient. They weren't looking to export to CARICOM. They were only looking to export to the U.S. In the 90s, foreign exchange shortages continued, high interest rates. There was the FinSac situation. Only the banks were saved, and many manufacturing companies also died. Now, between the 80s and 2000, we had a growth in remittances, and of course, the development of the tourist industry. And export for just purposes of obtaining foreign exchange was no longer essential. And therefore, after that, basically there was a lack of interest in manufacturing and more in local consumption and distribution. The other issue that we are facing from then to now is, of course, the high interest, high JPS bills, the security and the crime, and of course, more now than ever, the labor shortage and the transportation problems in getting people to work, low productivity, and problems in education. Now, why have we not been able to attract foreign manufacturing companies here, despite the closeness to Jamaica? If every foreign foreign-owned manufacturing company closed down, how is it that we are going to be able to attract new foreign manufacturers to come to Jamaica? And that's the dilemma. You know, JAMPRO has been at it for many years, 30 years, trying to bring in foreign manufacturers, but they haven't come because even though we are close to the U.S., there isn't that incentive.
Is it, John, that our approach has been too scattershot? Ought we not to look at because the export market today is completely different to what it was 20 years ago. We're dealing with a global village now. We're competing with countries all over the world, many of whom have made breakthroughs. Is it that we ought to look at that market and say, hey, you know, we can't run in the same league and class as China, right, and Japan and the Philippines. I mean, these guys are Indonesia. These guys are way ahead of us. But let us find. We don't need the whole market, you know, because if we got the whole market, we would know what to do with it. Mm-hmm. We just need a little stall somewhere where we can, you know, establish our presence, establish our brand, and build our customer loyalty. Ought we to be doing that? I mean, look. I saw in the papers 2 days ago, for example, you were talking a while ago about the difficulty in attracting foreign investors. I saw in the papers 2 days ago, I didn't know that we had reached there, where business process outsourcing now has 90 companies operating in Jamaica, employing 58,000 people. Now, is it that we need to find some more of that kind of opportunity? In other words, build on our strength, stay within the lane that we're comfortable and where we have the capacity, where we can provide the labor, rather than trying to, we're trying to sell a little ackee here and we're trying to export some condiments there.
Well, let me say that we have been, JAMPRO in particular, has been successful in attracting foreign-owned tourists, foreign-owned hotel operators. They've also seemed to have done a good job with the BPO sector, where we're told there are now almost 60,000 employees. So when foreign investors see an opportunity, as they did in tourism, as they have done in tourism, even with all our problems of high electricity and crime, they are able to make a business. They're able to come and invest. Now, my concern is that our current manufacturing sector comprise mainly small food and beverage companies. It's very difficult to break into the US and the UK and Canada. Even our biggest domestic-owned companies like Grace has had serious problems in breaking into the U.S. market.
You're talking about that? Some of them have problems even breaking into our own supermarket shelves here, because I still see a lot of foreign items on our supermarket shelves. I mean, things that I know we produce in Jamaica.
That is true. But at the same, let me go on to say, but you have a situation where Red Stripe and Ray & Nephew have powerful foreign owners, and they have been able to take those brands internationally and grow them at multi-digit rates of growth. That is a little different than say, our Jamaican-owned companies. However, so and I think because of the history that I mentioned before, our own Jamaican factory owners are a bit risk-averse and a little timid. Where I see the opportunities is that, since 2013, when we signed the IMF deal, and both parties have adhered to the rules, and we have developed macroeconomic stability for many years. This is now 9 years that we have seen where the economy has been stable. The governments haven't made any decisions that are at variance with economic development, and companies are beginning to see that they can plan for the future. We have also seen a situation where we have, let me say to you that where our difficulty is, Bruce, is in exporting to the U.S. in particular, and I'll use that one, which is probably the most area where we have the greatest success. The problem is that trying to get onto a supermarket shelf in the U.S., a public supermarket, even those in the areas where Jamaicans are, at most they're going to give you the whole of the Jamaican, the companies that export to Jamaica, from Jamaica, they're only going to give them about 16 feet of space. That means that if you look at a Jamaican supermarket now and go in there and see how many Jamaican products there are all over the store, and then say, how can all of those Jamaican products fit into 16 feet of space? That is the dilemma.
But you don't want all of them there, John?
No, but what I'm saying, no, I agree with you. You don't want all of them there, but that limits how much you can get in 16 feet. That will always limit our growth.
Yeah, but if you do well with the 16 feet, then maybe you can get another 16. I mentioned earlier, for example, that I was in a supermarket in Fort Lauderdale some time ago, and I saw Jamaican jerk seasoning on the counter, and I was so excited about it. I wasn't shopping for jerk seasoning, but I took it off and I read the label. Made in Indiana. Wasn't made in Spur Tree or made in Chapelton.
Right.
But part of the challenge that I find, I mean, you mentioned, for example, something that I know has for a long time been a constraint, and that was the cost of accessing capital. But then prior to the recent inflation thing, and I know you have strong views about the Bank of Jamaica's response and so on, but prior to that, interest rates were historically low. But I don't know that when I look at the report from the Bank of Jamaica on commercial bank loans and advances, I didn't see any explosion of loans to the productive sector. Is it that the bank, Gassanazan, he's one of those who has been very critical of the banks because he said they don't want to take no risks. So I mean, by the time you comply with all of their security requirements, it's just as well you don't bother borrow the money, because you don't need to borrow if you have that amount of security that you have to pledge to them.
That's right, and you know, the same way that Jamaican manufacturers historically have been somewhat risk averse, it's the same for the banks. And you know that in the 90s, when interest rates were very high, banks were charging some exorbitant. Well, they were offering very good deposit rates, and they were charging a lot of interest.
Well, they had to, because Treasury bill at one stage was 52%.
Right, but as you see now, with interest rates coming down, the banks are squeezed for profits, and now they're closing down branches and trying to become more efficient. But they're still risk averse in my mind. But let me say to you, as I said, the first bit of good news for me is the economic stability. The other thing that I see happening is that, and this happens with the 45 or so companies that have joined the junior stock exchange. I see when companies join the exchange, they are transformed just by the fact that the focus is on them when they have to issue their financials. The focus is on them because they have a board of directors, and they change from being timid and risk averse to being forward looking and growth oriented. And I see a massive change in these companies. I would like to see not just 45 companies listed on the junior exchange, but 100. And I believe if we got those kinds of companies listed, and they are out there, Bruce. I have spoken to many of our JMEA members. I have identified 50 companies that could go on the junior exchange, and I see that as a indication that there could be a powerful force that would drive exports.
Well, I had more than a little to do with the establishment of the junior exchange, and I'm glad. I'm glad to see that the government has resisted the pressure from the IMF, because the IMF was putting pressure on the government to abolish it, and I'm glad that they've resisted it. But let me ask you this, though. I made the point earlier when I was talking with Mr. Falconer from the IMF office. If you will readily agree that if we are to compete in the foreign market, first of all, there are some things that we can't compete in, so let us not even waste the time. There are things that China and Indonesia and Malaysia are way ahead of us on, right? But we can identify, the market is sufficiently broad that we can identify some areas where we have strengths and where we can capitalize. But we're going to have to be efficient, because if we're not efficient, even if we have the advantage today, somebody's going to take that away from us tomorrow. And in order to be efficient, we have to be on the cutting edge in terms of technology. I'm willing to bet you, John, that some of your members, if you walk into their factories today and rub off the dust and grime off the nameplate on some of their machines, it was made 30 years ago. 30-year-old machine, we can't cut it today. I know of one company, I won't call the name, but I know of one company, I know about their business quite well, that is constantly changing technology. The whole of their operation now is run by a computer. Computer tell the machine when to load up and when to mix and everything. If we don't go that route, you talk about problem to export, we have problems to even hold our own on our own supermarket shelves. Now, is it the stubbornness and the reticence of the banks in terms of providing financing? Why are we still trying to compete in 2022 with 30-year-old equipment and 40-year-old technology?
Well, I think you're right to some extent, but and there are also a number of manufacturers that have very modern equipment. But if you are having old equipment and you're only selling in Jamaica, maybe you can manage, but if you are going
you're not going to manage, because somebody abroad making that same goods with good equipment going to beat you on your own supermarket shelf even after they pay the duty.
Yeah, but the way I see it, Bruce, is that I am trying to be practical, and I say, okay, so number one, we have never really exported to CARICOM in any serious way. And yet that is the logical market for us. It's not U.S., where you have so many difficulties. Yes, they want some of our items, and the big companies will be able to get their goods on the public supermarket shelves and so on.
But you have another big problem there, and that's the shipping.
Where?
With CARICOM.
No, there's no problem with shipping.
No, but shipping is expensive because, well, you know the routes already. The ships going south are loaded. So that the cost of getting on those ships very expensive. And the ships coming back up, they're empty.
Yeah.
So it is so much cheaper for Trinidad to send something up to us than it is for to send something down to them.
Well, the shipping cost differential between Jamaica and Trinidad is not so big that it's insurmountable. But I'm not talking about Trinidad alone. You know more than anybody. The 3 million population in CARICOM with 3 times our per capita income. We're not even exporting to Barbados or any of the Eastern Caribbean countries in any significant extent. I believe if our companies focused on CARICOM, they could get an extra $100 or $150 million a year in exports.
Yes.
But we have to start. Why is it?
And I noticed, I know of one company, you probably know them too. I know of one company that has a huge warehouse in St. Lucia, for example. One Jamaican company. And it may be that, other exporters could work out a deal with them to move their stuff to their warehouse and have it distributed from there.
There are a lot of ways of getting it done, and my own company, we facilitate exports from other companies in Jamaica. But the question is, and this is where I think we can do something, the government can do something. We have a bunch of manufacturers in Jamaica that are underutilized. They're not running at 100% output, and they're, that can be exporting if they want, but they make excuses. The cost of getting into exports, traveling to the markets, marketing costs.
You mentioned before the problems of transportation and so on. I don't know if you had mentioned crime. I think you might have mentioned it, but a manufacturing plant today, if it is to be efficient, it can't operate on an 8-hour shift, John.
No, but you to get beyond 8 hours, you have to have the sales. So we have had our own factory has had to move to 9-hour shifts or something like that, and in one of our divisions we've gone to 3-hour shifts, but that's because we have been exporting for 10 or 15 years and the demand has increased. So, you have the situation of companies who are underutilizing their capacity, and they need to get into exports in the Caribbean. They need to then see those sales increase, and they need to move. In other words, it's not that we're not competitive in the Caribbean. It's not that we're not competitive. Even as inefficient as we are, we can compete because of the little 20% duty that we don't pay.
Yes.
And so on. But, the markets in the Caribbean, in Barbados and elsewhere, they're very similar to ours. The people eat the same types of things. They have the same traditions.
Well, maybe they are producing it for themselves, which is why we can't export. John, I'm out of time.
Not really.
I'm out of time. We have to leave it there. Thank you very much, John Mahfood, President of the Jamaica Manufacturers and Exporters Association. We take a break. We'll be back shortly. Welcome back. It's Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99. Today we're talking about Jamaica's export performance, our trade deficit. What it is that we can do to earn more from our exports. And we're very pleased to be joined now by Mrs. Diane Edwards, who is the president of the Jamaica Promotions Corporation, JAMPRO, as we call it. Diane, welcome to the program.
Thanks very much for having me. It's a big topic.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, and good afternoon to your listeners.
Good. Thank you for joining us. I have a long run-up before I bowl my first ball at you.
Okay.
We've been struggling for years to expand our exports. Minister Hill says export or die. Well, I've heard that before, and we're still not dead, but we're still not exporting. Tell me. Let me use an anecdote or an analogy. The average rural farmer, you see, he has a little plot of land. He plant a couple hills of yam and have 2 banana trees and have some callaloo and some tomato plants and some and grow a little of everything, right? And either he or his lady go to market with a little of this and a little of that. They've managed to put food on the table, no? But they're really not able to do more than that. I was wondering if that's the approach that we have been taking as well to the export market. I mean, we sell some red stripe, we sell ackee here and there. We managed to export some jerk seasoning. We do a little of this and a little of that. I saw in the papers, I told you it was going to be a long run-up. I saw in the papers a couple of days ago, the president of the, whatever you call it, BPO Association, where he says that we now have 90 companies operating in Jamaica, employing 58,000 people, and earned last year $780 million. $780 million is half of what we earned from all of our merchandise exports. Now, is it that we are approaching it like the rural cultivator, doing a little of this and doing a little of that? Is our experience telling us that, look, this global market is so ferociously competitive that we have to be strategic, we have to be targeted, we have to decide, at one time we were talking about logistics being a whole new frontier that we were going to approach. Is it that we need a few more BPO kind of targeting to say, now, look, we import over $5 billion worth of goods every year. And we need to be able to earn at least $5 billion from our exports. So this is, BPO can bring in so much. These are the other areas. And then instead of having poor Diane Edwards stretching ourselves over a whole heap of different areas, we focus and say, no, look, this is what we're going for. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely spot on. I think we have not approached export in a very strategic way, exactly as you're saying, and that is what JAMPRO is trying to do now. The number one problem with export is insufficient local production. So I'll give you an example. In 2021, we earned $36 million US from production of yam, which is the single largest agricultural export. I'm talking about fresh produce. So this is really looking at 36 million. And if you look at that in terms of tonnage, it's 186 tons. And the total demand worldwide is 18 million tons. So it's a drop in the bucket. So we have market opportunities which we're not taking advantage of. And I know anecdotally from visiting terminal markets in metropolitan countries that the Ghanaians are wiping the floor with us. So we need to really focus, as you've said, strategically, and we need to look at the supply side issues. One, if we say it's yam, ackee, certain orchard crops that we have identified, avocado, breadfruit, mango, what does it take to focus on these crops, decide, okay, we're going to put 2 to 10,000 acres in each of these based on the demand, and really focus on how do we ramp up the supply, number one, how do we get into the markets, number two, and JAMPRO has ample information on that. We have information on importers, etc. That's not the problem. The next question is how do we get the goods to market? We are still in a position where internal logistics are poor. 30 to 40% of produce is rotting or spoiling before it gets to market. So that is critical. The red tape in terms of export is another huge issue. The time to export, if you look at border compliance, what we have to do to comply with what the border regulatory agencies require. Dominican Republic, 16 hours. Jamaica, 58 hours.
But that's self-imposed?
Yeah.
We impose that on ourselves?
Yeah, because those are the regulations we have in order to export, and that's the time it takes to comply with the regulations. If you look at the cost of exporting, what is the mischief that is designed to cure? Well, a lot of it is some of it is
illegal contraband and so on.
Yeah, some of it is security, but some of it is duplication of processes. We actually have a whole program which is looking at the duplication of processes and how to reduce these. There are several border compliance agencies that have grown up over the years. Each one has a role to play, but we can streamline the export process, and that's what we have to do. So there are some things that we can actually do as a government to improve the ease of exporting. And then we have to look at the cost of exporting. To get a container to market from the DR is $1,613 US. From Kingston, it's $2,975. So these are the kinds of things
that
make us uncompetitive.
Why is that?
Partly because of the freight costs, the shipping rates, because the volume, shipping rates are determined based on volume, and they're determined based on two-way trade. So if you are sending containers in and sending them back out empty or close to empty, you're going to pay a lot more. Yeah. So there are a number of supply side issues that have to be attended to, have to be addressed. But a lot of that we can actually do, and we are doing. It's just taking a while. So what JAMPRO has done is developed a manufacturing strategy, an agribusiness strategy, and a global digital services strategy to address some of these issues. And then there's a whole trade facilitation task force that is working on the ease of exporting, which includes the single window and the port community system, the paperless trading. And then we are working on the national business portal, which is going to allow transactions online early next year.
Is the question of export incentives an issue?
The production incentives, I would say, is an issue. So, for instance, we have agribusiness incentives, but they were really set up for the small farmer whom you referred to in your introduction. They weren't really set up for large agribusiness concerns and modern, technologically driven agribusiness concerns. And that's what we need to do. We need to update a lot of our incentives to bring in more technology and to incentivize a collective approach. So those small farmers that you're talking about, they can produce and they can be part of the solution, but not in a one cocoa sense. So it has to be, 200 small farmers coming together in some kind of, I don't want to use the word cooperative, but it can be an enterprise, an organization, a company that then exports, because most of them are too small to export on their own. We have developed this program called Export Max, and Export Max helps a number of small and medium-sized enterprises on a really customized basis.
But that sounds to me though as if we're still scattershotting.
We're not getting to the strategic planning, as I said.
For example, I know, Dan, I know a couple of, and you know them too. I know a couple of large distributors of consumer goods in Jamaica. Mm-hmm. And every year, I think more than once a year, they are off to some big expo, sometimes in Dubai, and they go and they shop around. And you have this guy from Thailand who says, I can make Vienna sausages for you. Well, what's your quote? All right, make a note of that. By the time they finish, you sign up contracts, with all of these suppliers, whether it's from Philippines, Thailand, you name it, India.
Yep.
And when you see the products on the supermarket shelf, it has a Jamaican label,
Mm-hmm.
But when you look at the fine print, it says manufactured for so-and-so, Kingston, Jamaica.
Yes.
Not manufactured in, but manufactured for.
Correct.
And is Thailand you're getting it from? And I'm talking about things, everyday stuff that everybody, rich and poor alike, buy in the supermarkets. We can't compete with that. Why we don't just admit that and say, no, look, that's not where we must cast our net? We can't compete with those countries.
We can't compete on Vienna sausages, but we have identified markets for a number of things. For instance, ackee. We can compete on ackee because the diaspora wants ackee, yes, because the demand is less price sensitive than for another crop. We can compete on mangoes because Julie and East Indian mangoes are prized in the international market. People line up.
And we have to pray that Thailand or Malaysia don't get hold of a couple of ackee seeds and go plant them.
Well, exactly. But while we have the advantage, if we really focus on those crops for which we know, I named you 4 orchard crops, which we know there is market for: breadfruit, ackee, mango, and avocado. These are products which we could seriously compete with. But we have to decide that these are the priorities, and we have to get big companies to produce them, and we have to incentivize them and really develop a programmed approach to exporting. That's the only way we can do it. It's what you said at the beginning: strategy and focus and export planning.
Tell me, G. Arthur Brown, when he was conferred with the Doctor of Laws at the University of the West Indies, and I'm talking about 1976, that's what, 40 odd years ago, he said in his acceptance speech, he said Jamaica's future lies in services. After 46 years, have we taken him seriously?
I would say, again, we have not taken the programmed approach to exports of anything, really. So the BPO situation, we have attracted BPO firms here, and they are, by definition, global firms. Have we sat here and said we are going to develop the technology side of Jamaica, the technology companies, and help them into export. JAMPRO is starting to do that. We have an outward mission that is planned for later this year, which will take tech companies into the market. But we have developed 2 national export plans, and the government has not really gotten behind those export plans and the national export strategies, they were called. And that's why we have not really made a dent in exports. Now we have a minister, in Minister Aubin Hill, who is championing export. So we're going to see now what a focused and more strategic approach to exports. How will that make a dent? But it has to be a holistic focus because, as I said, the supply side needs a lot of work.
But again, we have to be strategic. I mean, for example, the BPO thing seems to have been a winner, and that had to have come out of strategic thinking. I don't know where we are in terms of the logistics, because at one stage there was this new great hope that Jamaica was going to become the logistics center of the northern Latin American region. Even in services, we have to be strategic. We have to spearfish. We have to pick. We have to see where our strengths are, both in terms of what we're capable of doing and what we are able to access the market to absorb. Are we doing that?
Yes, to some extent, but we need much more data to be able to do it in a more successful way. So, for instance, BPO is not considered an industry. So you don't have statistics on BPO that can allow you to make decisions. Tourism is not an industry because it's a cross-cutting set of activities. So we need to improve our data collection and what they call satellite accounts, which would allow us to look at sectoral plans for each sector, for each industry sector. And a lot of those plans have not been updated since 2007. I know because I've asked.
I don't know why I was under the impression that we had segregated tourism from just at about the time when I was leaving office. Hadn't we?
There's hotels and restaurants, but hotels and restaurants is not really giving you a true picture of tourism and its contribution to GDP.
Yes.
So you have to really look at the satellite accounts, as I'm saying, which can aggregate things in a different way, and then you can start to plan on a sectoral basis. We are actually under our GSS project funding a STATIN person to dedicate the time to look at the global services sector, which includes BPO, and look at what is its contribution to GDP and how do you establish a methodology to analyze that. Because if you don't start with the data, you're not going to be making good decisions. Agriculture is in a slightly better position in terms of the data generation, but we're not really looking at agriculture as a business, which is where we need to go.
What about the creative industries? Is that a growth potential?
Huge opportunity, because when AI has done for all our different professions, you know, they're trying to get AI to write poetry and write songs, but it will never be the same as a human being because AI doesn't have lived experience. So I think that the creative industries and IP-related industries, intellectual property-related industries, is definitely a huge opportunity for Jamaica. But again, we have to be deliberate. We have to look at the structures, we have to look at the enabling environment, and how do we help our creatives to understand the business of creative industries, because it's the business side we have not developed. We have all this talent, but we're not developing the business side. Now, interestingly, I don't know if you realize that Sharon Burke and Shaggy are planning a business of creative or business of music workshop next year, February.
I saw that.
And I think that is a move in the right direction.
But is JAMPRO engaged with those practitioners in the creative industries?
Yes, we are. We've done more on film than we have on the music side, largely because film is a more organized industry sector with JAFTA, the Jamaica Film and Television Association. So but that has been a disappointment, has it not? Well, again, I say the enabling environment, Prime Minister.
Yeah,
the enabling environment is the key, because what we have done is rest on our laurels while the rest of the Caribbean around us has created rebates for the film industry. You get 34% rebate if you film in Trinidad, for instance, which is why we have lost some productions to Trinidad. Dominican Republic, same thing. Puerto Rico, they all are offering rebates. We have just chosen not to offer rebates, and we have written the film industry out of the incentive program when we reformed it in around 2013. So we have got to go back there and look at the tax incentives. It's no point thinking what is fair and what is not. It's what works and what makes us competitive. That's the question we need to ask.
Well, of course, that tax incentives is almost like a bad word for the IMF and the multilaterals, but I've always argued, for example, that we have to look at what we're up against, what we have to compete with.
Exactly.
If we are out of step, then we're going to be left behind.
Exactly, that's my point. And when you have the rest of the Caribbean around you having decided to rebate film expenditure, we can't sit here and say, but we don't think that that's a good idea, because we'll just lose the productions to other locations, and then we'll cry.
I had John Mahfood on a while ago, before you came on, and one of the points that he made, he was bemoaning the fact that our local manufacturers, and we're talking about goods, no, not services, but he was bemoaning the fact that our local manufacturers do not take advantage of the access that they have, duty-free access to the CARICOM market.
Yep.
Why is that?
Partly because a lot of manufacturers feel it's too difficult, but partly because of the shipping and the logistics, which is why we needed to build the logistics hub, because getting down to the Caribbean market, we had a company, for instance, that was looking at setting up their logistics operation in Jamaica, and they chose Miami. Why? Because they told me the frequency of shipping into the Eastern Caribbean was so much better. And that's the problem. We have 529 exporters, active exporters on our list. Of them, 139 only are benefiting from trade agreements. Most of them actually from CARICOM, 116. So, but they're very few. If you look at that number out of 529, that's 25, 26%. This is just not enough.
If a local manufacturer is shipping a container down to Barbados, for example, is it possible for him to ship it straight, or it have to go to Miami and go down to Barbados or something like that?
Quite often it goes to Miami, or it goes to Puerto Rico, or it goes to Dominican Republic, or it goes somewhere else, and all of that increases the cost.
Yes.
So I talked to some people in Guyana who used to import limestone from Jamaica to improve the pH of their soil in Guyana, and they stopped doing it because the cost was prohibitive. So that cost element is something we need to study very closely, and we have got to sort out within CARICOM. There has to be a concerted effort to improve the logistics and the cost of shipping. Otherwise, we won't impact on the export to CARICOM.
There was some time ago when aggregates was being touted as a new area of export opportunities. Is that so?
Yes, it in fact is happening as we speak. Last week I went down to Lidford Mines to observe the loading of a ship, which was, 38,000 tons of aggregate going into Savannah, Georgia. And that is the first of a regular shipment once a month that is meant to be going out there. And we also have a large company that is looking at Jamaica now for export of limestone aggregate. So there is a real opportunity.
Is the U.S. our main market, or are there alternative markets as well?
There are alternative markets. I know people have shipped as far as Chile, Panama, various places, but the U.S. is the most obvious and easiest market because, again, of the frequency of shipping and the cost of shipping. But we have pharmaceutical grade and food grade limestone, which is what we need to get exploited here. I mean, limestone is the base of so many different products, from toothpaste to tablets, you know.
There was a news item, was it yesterday or today, from the tourist sector, talking about a shortage of workers for the tourism sector. The Prime Minister had been talking about the question as to whether or not, well, he had been talking about a labor shortage. I saw something last week. I stopped at Mother's. I love Mother's jerk chicken. And I stopped at Mother's. And I've never seen this in Jamaica before. I saw a sign on the Mother's door that said, hiring now. I heard Cliff Hughes on his program this morning when I was coming down, talking about it, that he has seen that sign on a number of stores. So
yes.
If we're talking about exports, do we have the labor force to support it?
You see, we have a labor force that we have not trained sufficiently, and it comes back to training and education and providing. I guess it goes back to primary education, because we don't have enough people graduating with enough skills to be able to go into vocational training or into academic training or any kind of training. So we really need to improve the graduation scores and rates of people coming out of high school. Otherwise, we will not have the people to go into tourism, into the restaurant trade, or into BPO and global services. That is the problem we are facing now.
Or we have to import them, which will increase our cost.
And I hear about this importing people, but remember that people who come to Jamaica to set up an operation, they're not really thinking, oh, we'll import 300 Filipinos, because that is cost for them.
Yes.
What they want to do is come and find a workforce here, and it's much better for us to train people here than to import them because of all sorts of social issues. We have to find a way to explain to our young people that it's better you get a job, a regular job, and maybe it'll take you longer to own a house, but scamming is not a profession, it's not an opportunity. It carries a very high risk, and you need to start thinking differently about your future.
That's a whole new discussion you're embarking on there.
Yeah, I know, and I don't want to go down that road, but I'm just saying that is one of the reasons why we're losing some of that younger generation, and we have got to really look at how do we get our young people into some productive enterprise.
We're out of time. Diane Edwards, President of JAMPRO, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much. Great discussion.
Good.
Thank you. Bye.
That brings us to the end of the program. Jamaica Live, Bridge 99. Another day, another program. Hope you found it interesting. Hope you'll be able to form your own ideas, form your own opinions, and perhaps help us to find solutions to these issues that we discuss every week on this program. God bless you. See you next week.